Imagine the smell. It's summer. The palace windows are closed, curtains drawn, guards stationed at every door with orders to let nobody through. And inside, in the royal bedchamber, there's a body. The king's body. He's been dead for 7 months. 7 months of heat. 7 months of decay. 7 months of rot spreading through silk sheets and expensive bedding. The flesh has turned black. The skin has split open. Fluids have leaked into the mattress. Insects have made homes in what used to be a face. And everyone in the palace knows. The servants know. The guards know. The advisors know. They walk past that room every day, holding their breath, trying not to gag, pretending they don't smell death seeping through the walls. But they're not allowed to say anything, not allowed to tell anyone outside the palace, not allowed to hold a funeral, not allowed to bury the body. Because officially, the king isn't dead. Officially, he's just sick, resting, recovering. Any day now, he'll emerge from his chambers, healthy and strong, ready to rule again. That's the lie. And for 7 months, an entire palace, an entire government, an entire kingdom maintained that lie, while a corpse rotted in the royal bed. This is the story they tried to bury along with the king, the conspiracy that held a nation hostage, the smell that couldn't be hidden, and the question that still haunts historians: how did they think they could get away with it? Let me paint you a picture of what 7 months of decomposition looks like, because we need to understand exactly what these people were dealing with, what they were hiding, what they were living with. When a human body dies, decomposition begins within minutes. The cells start breaking down. Bacteria in the intestines, which were kept in check while the person was alive, suddenly have free rein. They start consuming the body from the inside out. Within hours, the abdomen begins to bloat with gas. The skin takes on a greenish tint. The smell begins. At first, it's subtle, almost sweet, but it gets worse, much worse. After a few days, the body enters what forensic scientists call active decay. The gases build up until the abdomen swells like a balloon. Sometimes it bursts. Fluids leak from every orifice. The face becomes unrecognizable. The eyes sink into the skull. The tongue swells and protrudes from the mouth. And the smell, it's not something you can describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's thick. It clings to your clothes, your hair, the inside of your nose. It's the smell of rot and bacteria and human waste all mixed together. It makes you gag, makes your eyes water, makes you want to run. Now imagine that process continuing for 7 months. In a palace, in summer, with the windows closed. Most bodies are buried or cremated within days for a reason, because after a week, decomposition is so advanced that the body is barely recognizable as human. After a month, it's mostly bones and dried tissue. After 7 months, there shouldn't be much left except skeleton and stains. But this wasn't a normal burial situation. This was a king, and for reasons we'll explore, the people in power decided that this body needed to stay exactly where it was, in that bed, in that room, rotting, while they figured out what to do next. So here's the question that should be screaming in your mind right now. Why? Why would anyone do this? Why would you keep a corpse in your palace for 7 months? Why not just announce the king's death, hold a funeral, and move on? What were they so afraid of? That's what we need to figure out. Because the answer to that question unlocks one of the most disturbing political conspiracies in history. A conspiracy that involved dozens of people. A conspiracy that required lying to an entire kingdom. A conspiracy that meant living with death, literally, for 7 months. And a conspiracy that almost worked. Before we get into the specifics of who this king was and why his death was hidden, I want you to think about the logistics of hiding a corpse for 7 months, because this wasn't just about keeping a secret. This was about managing a biological disaster. The smell alone would have been overwhelming. You can't hide the smell of a decomposing body. It permeates everything, seeps through walls, travels down corridors. The servants who had to enter that room to maintain the illusion that the king was still alive, they would have needed to prepare themselves, hold their breath, cover their faces, move quickly, and then they'd leave, and the smell would follow them. Their clothes would reek, their hair would reek. How do you explain that? How do you walk through the palace reeking of death and pretend nothing's wrong? They probably burned incense, lots of it, throughout the palace, told people the king had requested it for his health, aromatherapy or some medieval equivalent. But incense doesn't cover the smell of death. It just mixes with it, creates this sickly sweet combination that's somehow worse than either smell alone. Then there's the visual problem. At some point, people are going to ask the questions. Ministers will want to see the king. Ambassadors will request audiences. Family members will demand to visit. How do you handle that? You can't let anyone actually see the body, so you create excuses. The king is too weak to receive visitors. His doctors have ordered complete rest. He's contagious, and we can't risk spreading illness. Maybe you have someone stand guard outside his chamber. delivering fake updates. His Majesty is resting comfortably. His Majesty has asked not to be disturbed. His Majesty's condition is improving. All lies, all delivered with a straight face, while everyone involved knows that His Majesty is a liquefying corpse on the other side of that door. But here's what makes this situation truly insane. This wasn't just a few people covering up a death. This was an organized conspiracy involving the highest levels of government. The royal advisors, the palace staff, the doctors, the guards, dozens of people, maybe hundreds, all keeping the same secret, all maintaining the same lie, all living with the knowledge that their king was dead and rotting while they pretended he was alive. How do you coordinate that? How do you make sure nobody breaks? How do you guarantee that some servant doesn't get drunk in a tavern and spill the secret? How do you keep an entire palace silent for 7 months? The answer is fear. Absolute crushing fear. Because whoever orchestrated this cover-up had to make it very clear. If you talk, you die. Not arrested, not exiled, dead. Your family too, probably. That's the only way you keep this many people silent for this long. You make the consequences of speaking worse than the horror of staying quiet. Now let's talk about who this king was, because this isn't a hypothetical scenario. This actually happened in the 14th century, in the Kingdom of Portugal. The king's name was Ferdinand I. He died in October 1383, but his death wasn't announced until May 1384. 7 months hiding a corpse. 7 months of conspiracy. 7 months of lying to an entire nation. And the reason why is even more disturbing than you might think. Ferdinand died without a male heir. He had one daughter, Beatrice, who was married to the King of Castile, Portugal's neighbor and historical rival. According to the succession laws, Beatrice should have inherited the throne, which meant the King of Castile would effectively control Portugal. This was unacceptable to the Portuguese noble. They didn't want to be absorbed into Castile. They didn't want to lose their power, their wealth, their independence. So when Ferdinand died, they made a decision. They would hide his death, buy themselves time, find another candidate for the throne, someone Portuguese, someone they could control. And then, once everything was arranged, once their chosen candidate was secure, they would announce Ferdinand's death and present their alternative. It was a coup disguised as a cover-up, a power grab masked as mourning. But it required keeping Ferdinand's body in the palace, because if they buried him, if they held a funeral, people would ask questions. Why wasn't Beatrice crowned immediately? Why was there a delay? Where was the body? So the body stayed in the royal bedchamber, decomposing. While the nobles plotted, while the servants burned incense and lied to visitors, while an entire government operated as if their king was alive, knowing full well he was rotting upstairs. Can you imagine being one of those servants? Going to work every day in a palace that smells like death, walking past the royal chamber where your king's corpse is falling apart, maintaining the fiction that everything is normal? Some of them probably quit, just walked away, couldn't handle it anymore. But most stayed, because they had families to feed. Because they didn't want to be accused of treason. Because in a conspiracy this big, leaving is almost as dangerous as talking. You know too much. You're a liability. So you stay. You do your job. You pretend. And you try not to think about what's behind that closed door. Now here's where it gets even darker. The nobles didn't just hide Ferdinand's death. They continued to rule in his name. They issued orders as if they came from the king. They signed documents with his seal. They made political decisions and attributed them to Ferdinand. It was government by ghost. A dead king whose name and authority were being used by people pursuing their own agenda. And it worked. For 7 months, nobody outside the palace knew Ferdinand was dead. The kingdom continued to function. Taxes were collected, laws were enforced, diplomatic relations continued, all under the name of a corpse. But you can't hide something like this forever. 7 months is a long time, too long. People started to get suspicious. Why hadn't anyone seen the king? Why were all his orders being delivered through intermediaries? Why did the palace smell so strange? Rumors began to spread. Whispers in marketplaces, speculation in taverns. Something was wrong at the palace. Something was being hidden. And slowly, inevitably, the truth started to leak out. The first crack in the conspiracy came from an unexpected source, a servant, not a high-ranking official or a noble with a conscience, just a regular palace servant who couldn't take it anymore, who couldn't keep pretending, who told a friend, who told another friend. And within days, the rumor was spreading through Lisbon. The king is dead. They're hiding his body. It's been months. At first, people didn't believe it. How could something so insane be true? How could a king's death be hidden? How could a body be kept in the palace for months? It was too absurd. But then more servants started talking. More details emerged. The smell, the closed chambers, the constant excuses. The incense burned day and night, and people started to realize, it's true, the king is dead, and they've been lying to us for 7 months. The public reaction was explosive. Riots in the streets, demands for answers, accusations of treason. The nobles who had orchestrated the cover-up suddenly found themselves in danger, not from Castile, from their own people. Because hiding a king's death isn't just a political maneuver. It's a betrayal. It's treating your own citizens like they don't matter, like they don't deserve to know the truth. The Portuguese people were furious, and they demanded justice. They demanded to know who was responsible. They demanded to see the king's body. And that's when the conspirators realized they had a problem, because after 7 months, there wasn't much left to see. The body had decomposed so severely that it was barely identifiable. How do you prove this corpse was once your king? How do you give people closure when the remains are so degraded they're almost unrecognizable? In May 1384, 7 months after Ferdinand's actual death, the Portuguese government finally admitted the truth. They announced that the king had died. They claimed he'd been sick for months and had passed peacefully in his sleep. No mention of the cover-up, no explanation for the delay, just a simple announcement. The king is dead. Long live? Well, that was the problem. Who was the next king? Beatrice, Ferdinand's daughter, was the legal heir. But the nobles had spent 7 months plotting to prevent her succession. They had a candidate, John of Aviz, an illegitimate son of Portugal's previous king, not technically in line for the throne, but Portuguese. And, more importantly, willing to do what the nobles wanted. So they declared John the king, ignored Beatrice's claim, and dared anyone to challenge them. This sparked a war, the War of Portuguese Succession. Castile invaded to support Beatrice's claim. Portugal defended John's. Thousands died. The country was torn apart, all because a group of nobles decided to hide a king's death for 7 months instead of following the legal succession. But here's the thing, it worked. John of Aviz became King John I of Portugal. He ruled for 48 years, founded a dynasty, launched the age of Portuguese exploration. He's remembered as one of Portugal's greatest kings. And the 7 months of conspiracy, the rotting corpse in the palace, the lies told to an entire nation. History mostly forgot, because the winners write the history books, and John won. Now let's talk about what happened to the people who knew. The servants who kept the secret, the guards who stood outside that chamber, the nobles who orchestrated everything. Did they face consequences? Some did. A few servants who talked too much mysteriously disappeared. Accidents. Officially, tragedy. But everyone knew. You don't betray a conspiracy this big and survive. The nobles who led the cover-up, most of them thrived. They were rewarded for their loyalty to John, given titles, land, positions of power, because they'd helped him seize the throne. They'd committed treason against the legal succession, but from John's perspective, they were heroes. And the doctors who examined Ferdinand's body and declared him merely ill for 7 months, they kept their positions, kept their reputation, because everyone involved had too much to lose if the full truth came out. It was easier to maintain the fiction, to say Ferdinand had been sick, to pretend the delay was medical, not political, to rewrite history so that 7 months of conspiracy became 7 months of careful mourning. But some people knew, always. The servants who'd walked past that chamber every day, the guards who'd smelled the decay, the advisors who'd signed documents in a dead king's name. They knew, and they lived with that knowledge for the rest of their lives. Some of them probably felt guilty, probably wondered if they should have spoken up sooner, probably had nightmares about the smell, the lies, the corpse rotting while everyone pretended. Others probably felt nothing, saw it as necessary, practical, just politic, just the way power works. You do what you have to do. You serve whoever's in charge. You survive. Here's what makes this story particularly disturbing. It's not unique. Throughout history, there have been multiple instances of dead rulers being hidden while power struggles played out. In ancient China, emperors' deaths were hidden for weeks or months. In medieval Europe, similar cover-ups occurred when succession was disputed. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's death was hidden for days while his inner circle fought for control. The details change, the technology changes, but the pattern is the same. Powerful people die. Other powerful people see an opportunity, and the truth becomes a casualty. The king is dead. Not yet. Not until we say so. Not until we're ready. The ruler has passed. No, he's just sleeping, just sick, just recovering. Don't disturb him. Don't ask questions. Just trust us. And most people do, because challenging power is dangerous, because asking questions can get you killed, because it's easier to believe the lie than to confront the truth. Ferdinand's body decomposed for 7 months while his kingdom operated in ignorance. And when the truth finally came out, most people just accepted the revised story. The king was sick. The doctors did their best. It was a tragedy. But these things happen. Nobody wanted to dig deeper. Nobody wanted to ask why it took 7 months to announce his death. Nobody wanted to think about what that chamber must have been like. Because the alternative, accepting that your government lied to you for 7 months, that your leaders conspired to deny you the truth, that you were living in a kingdom run by people who kept a rotting corpse in the palace while they plotted a coup, that's too disturbing. That's too horrifying. It's easier to believe it was just illness, just bad luck, just one of those things. But archaeology doesn't forget. History doesn't forget. And centuries later, when historians started examining records from that period, they found the truth. Letters from servants describing the smell, diplomatic reports from foreign ambassadors noting the suspicious delay, financial records showing massive purchases of incense, and testimony from people involved in the conspiracy who, decades later, confessed what really happened. Ferdinand died in October 1383. His body was kept in the palace for 7 months. The government ruled in his name while his corpse decomposed, and when they finally announced his death, they lied about when it happened. That's not speculation. That's documented history. And it raises a question that's still relevant today. What else are we not being told? What other truths are being hidden while we're fed comfortable lies? How many times in history have the powerful decided that we don't deserve to know what's really happening, that we can't handle the truth, that it's better for us to remain ignorant while they manage things behind closed doors? Ferdinand's decomposing corpse is just one example, one particularly gruesome, impossible to ignore example. But it's not the only one. And if they could hide a king's death for 7 months in the 14th century, with primitive technology and no mass media, imagine what can be hidden today. With professional PR firms, with controlled media, with sophisticated propaganda, how long could a leader's death be hidden now? How many layers of lies could be constructed? How many people could be paid or threatened into silence? I'm not saying this is happening now. I'm saying it has happened multiple times throughout history. And the only reason we know about Ferdinand is because the conspiracy eventually fell apart, because someone talked, because the smell became too obvious, because 7 months was too long. But what about the cover-ups that succeeded? The ones where the conspirators were smarter, where the timeline was shorter, where the evidence was destroyed? We'll never know about those, by definition, because they worked. The only conspiracies we discover are the failed ones, which means, logically, there must be successful conspiracies we'll never discover, secrets that stayed secret, lies that became accepted history. And that's the truly disturbing thought. Not that Ferdinand's body rotted for 7 months, but that we only know about it because the cover-up failed. How many succeeded? How many kings, queens, presidents, leaders have died while their deaths were hidden? While their advisors and handlers maintained the illusion of leadership? While the machinery of government continued running, powered by lies? We don't know. We can't know. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the greatest conspiracy is making us believe that conspiracies are rare, that they're anomalies, that they don't happen anymore, that we live in a transparent age where truth always comes out. But Ferdinand's rotting corpse suggests otherwise. It suggests that when power is at stake, truth is optional. That when the stakes are high enough, people will do anything, hide anything, lie about anything, even keep a decomposing body in the royal bedchamber for 7 months while they figure out their next move. So I'll leave you with this. Somewhere in Portugal, in October 1383, a king died, and instead of announcing his death, his advisors made a choice. They closed the doors, they posted guards, they burned incense, and they lied for 7 months while the body rotted, while the smell spread, while everyone in the palace knew the truth but stayed silent. They lied to the entire kingdom. They ruled in a dead king's name. They issued orders from a corpse, and when they finally admitted the truth, they lied about that too. Said he'd just died, said it was illness, said it was unavoidable, and most people believed them because the alternative was too horrible to accept. But now you know. You know what happened in that palace. You know what those nobles did. You know that for 7 months, Portugal was ruled by a corpse. And you know that the only reason we found out is because they failed to keep the secret, which makes you wonder, what secrets are being kept right now? What truths are we not being told? What's rotting behind closed doors while we're fed comfortable lies? The smell of Ferdinand's decomposing body couldn't be hidden forever. Truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually seeps through the walls. But sometimes, by the time it does, everyone involved is dead. Everyone who could be held accountable is gone. And all we're left with is a disturbing story from history. A warning that power and truth don't always coexist. And a question that can never be fully answered. What else don't we know? This is the story they tried to bury with the king. The 7 months of conspiracy. The rotting corpse in the royal bed. The lies that held a nation hostage. Now you know. and you can't unknow it. If this story disturbed you, if it made you question what else has been hidden throughout history, hit that like button and subscribe. Comment below. Do you think this could happen today? Could a leader's death be hidden for months? Let me know your theory. I'll see you in the next one.